The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard of the Blackwood estate, where Maya Johnson swept the same stone steps she had cleaned every day for the past 3 years. Her dark hands moved mechanically across the rough surface, each stroke precise and efficient, though her mind wandered far from the menial task. The other servants whispered that she was broken, that whatever spark she once possessed had been snuffed out by the endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and serving the wealthy Blackwood family. Maya had arrived at the estate under circumstances no one discussed openly. The official story was that she was a domestic worker who needed employment after losing her previous position. The truth was far more complicated, buried beneath layers of legal documents and sealed records that even the Blackwoods themselves had never bothered to examine. She had simply appeared one day, recommended by a mysterious contact who assured them she would be the perfect servant, quiet, obedient, and completely forgettable. Mrs. Catherine Blackwood emerged from the grand front entrance, her silk mourning robe flowing behind her like a banner of privilege. She was a woman who had never known hardship, born into money and married into even more. Her pale blue eyes surveyed Maya with the same casual indifference she might show a piece of furniture. "The floors in the East Wing need scrubbing again," Catherine announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "And make sure you use the proper cleaning solution this time. I could smell vinegar from the library yesterday, and it was absolutely revolting." Maya nodded silently, never lifting her eyes from the steps. This submissive posture had become second nature, a carefully constructed mask that concealed everything she truly was. Catherine had no idea that the woman kneeling before her had once moved through hostile territory in complete darkness, had neutralized armed threats without making a sound, and had saved the lives of countless innocent people in places whose names never appeared in newspapers. The Blackwood estate sprawled across 200 acres of prime real estate, a monument to old money and older prejudices. Richard Blackwood had inherited the property from his grandfather, along with attitudes about social hierarchy that belonged to a different century. He treated Maya and the other domestic staff not as employees but as necessary inconveniences, barely registering their humanity. As Maya gathered her cleaning supplies, she caught fragments of conversation drifting from the breakfast room. Richard was entertaining guests, local businessmen, and politicians who shared his narrow worldview. Their voices carried clearly through the thin walls, discussing deals and decisions that would affect thousands of lives without ever considering the human cost. "The problem with these people," Richard was saying, his voice thick with entitlement, "is they don't understand their place. Give them an inch, and they think they deserve a mile. That's why you have to keep them in line from the beginning." Maya's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around the cleaning bucket handle. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times, had endured the casual racism and deliberate humiliation that the Blackwoods considered their right. But something was different today. The careful control she had maintained for 3 years was beginning to show hairline cracks. The morning routine continued with predictable monotony. Maya moved through the house like a ghost, invisible to the family she served. She prepared their meals, cleaned their messes, and absorbed their casual cruelty without reaction. To them, she was nothing more than a function, a service to be used, and discarded when no longer needed. But Maya carried secrets that would have shattered their comfortable assumptions about the woman they considered worthless. Hidden beneath her simple servants' clothing were scars that told stories of battles fought in defense of freedom and justice. Her seemingly weak frame concealed muscles trained to deadly precision, reflexes honed by years of the most intensive military training imaginable. She had been Lieutenant Maya Johnson, United States Navy SEALs, one of the first women to complete the grueling training program that broke even the strongest men. Her service record was classified at the highest levels, filled with missions that officially never happened in places that didn't exist on any map. She had been decorated for valor, respected by her teammates, and feared by America's enemies. The transition from military life to civilian existence had been devastating, not because of combat trauma, though she carried those invisible wounds like every veteran, but because of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy that had destroyed her career and forced her into hiding. Powerful people had decided that Maya knew too much, had seen things that threatened their carefully constructed lies about honor and patriotism. Now she found herself trapped in a different kind of war, fighting a battle of endurance against people who saw her as less than human. The irony was crushing. She who had risked everything to protect American freedom now found herself enslaved by Americans who wrapped their hatred in flags and false righteousness. The afternoon brought new humiliations. Catherine's sister, Helen, arrived for lunch with her own collection of prejudices and petty cruelties. The two women took perverse pleasure in finding fault with Maya's work, inventing reasons to criticize and demean her. They spoke about her as if she wasn't present, discussing her supposed laziness and stupidity with the casual cruelty of people who had never faced real hardship. "I don't know why you keep her around," Helen said, picking at her salad while Maya served coffee. "There are plenty of better options available. More reliable workers who actually appreciate having a position." Catherine shrugged, enjoying the power dynamic too much to consider change. "She serves her purpose. Sometimes it's better to have someone who knows their place rather than deal with uppity help who think they deserve respect." Maya's training had taught her to read people, to assess threats, and identify weaknesses in seconds. She could see the fear beneath Catherine's arrogance, the deep insecurity that drove her need to dominate others. These women were bullies who had never faced real danger, who mistook privilege for strength and cruelty for power. As the day wore on, Maya found herself remembering her fellow SEALs, the brothers and sisters who had stood with her in the face of impossible odds. They had trusted each other with their lives, had shared bonds forged in the crucible of combat and sacrifice. The contrast with her current situation was almost unbearable. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun had been Maya's closest friend in the teams, a brilliant tactician who could outthink any enemy and outfight most allies. She had stood up for Maya when the accusations started flying, had fought to protect her reputation even when it endangered her own career. Maya wondered if Sarah ever thought about her, if she knew what had happened in the months since Maya disappeared from official records. The evening brought the day's worst moment. Richard returned from his business meetings in a foul mood, apparently having lost some deal he considered crucial. He stormed through the house looking for targets for his frustration, and Maya became his chosen victim. He found fault with everything she had done, screaming about incompetence and worthlessness while she stood silently enduring the verbal assault. "You people are all the same," he shouted, his face red with manufactured rage. "No work ethic, no pride, no appreciation for the opportunities you're given. Maybe what you need is a reminder about gratitude and respect." The threat hung in the air like poison gas, unspoken but clearly understood. Maya had seen this pattern before, had recognized the signs of escalating abuse that preceded physical violence. Richard was building himself up to cross a line he had only approached before, convincing himself that his anger justified whatever he might do. But, as Richard stepped closer, something shifted in Maya's posture. The change was subtle, invisible to untrained eyes, but her body was automatically assuming a defensive stance learned through countless hours of hand-to-hand combat training. Her breathing steadied, her weight distributed evenly, her hands positioned for maximum effectiveness should violence become necessary. For just a moment, Richard caught a glimpse of something dangerous in Maya's eyes. It was gone so quickly he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. But the memory lingered like an uncomfortable itch. The woman standing before him suddenly didn't seem quite as helpless as he had assumed. Maya forced herself back into submission, allowing her shoulders to slump and her gaze to fall. The moment passed, and Richard convinced himself that he had simply been seeing things. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and with it came the first hint that the Blackwood family's comfortable assumptions about their powerless servant might be dangerously wrong. As night fell, and the house settled into darkness, Maya lay on her narrow cot in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling and fighting memories that threatened to overwhelm her careful control. She thought about the oath she had taken as a SEAL, the promise to defend freedom and protect the innocent from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations, and new tests of her resolve. But something fundamental had shifted. The psychological walls that had kept her passive were beginning to crumble, and beneath them lay capabilities that the Blackwood family could never imagine. The woman they considered worthless was about to remind the world exactly what she was worth. The next morning arrived with an unusual commotion that shattered the estate's normal routine. Maya was preparing breakfast when she heard raised voices from the main entrance, followed by the sound of expensive cars pulling up the circular driveway. Through the kitchen window, she watched as several black SUVs disgorged men in expensive suits, their movements precise and coordinated in a way that immediately triggered her tactical awareness. Catherine Blackwood emerged from her bedroom in a panic, her usual composed demeanor replaced by obvious fear. She barked orders at Maya with unusual urgency, demanding that the house be made perfect for unexpected guests who apparently commanded significant respect and terror in equal measure. "These people cannot find any flaws," Catherine hissed, her face pale beneath her makeup. "Everything must be absolutely perfect. Do you understand? Your life depends on it, and so does mine." The visitors turned out to be representatives of Viktor Kozlov, a Russian oligarch whose business interests extended far beyond legitimate enterprises. Richard had apparently borrowed heavily from Kozlov's organization to fund some failed venture, and payment had come due with interest that far exceeded any reasonable calculation. Maya recognized the type immediately: professional criminals who used violence as casually as other people used conversation. Victor himself arrived an hour later, a man whose soft appearance concealed the ruthlessness that had carved his empire from the chaos of post-Soviet Russia. He was accompanied by his personal bodyguard, Dmitry Volkov, a former Spetsnaz operator whose reputation for brutality was known in intelligence circles worldwide. Maya had actually encountered references to Volkov in classified briefings, though she had never expected to see him in person. The meeting that followed was tense and one-sided. Victor made it clear that Richard's debt had grown beyond money into something more personal and dangerous. The Russian had decided that financial compensation alone would not satisfy the insult of tardiness and excuses. He wanted Richard to understand the price of disrespecting powerful people. "Your problem," Victor said in accented but perfect English, "is that you believe your privilege protects you from consequences. This is American thinking, that money and connections can solve any problem. But some debts require more than currency to settle." Richard's face had gone ashen as he realized that his comfortable world was about to become very uncomfortable. He stammered excuses and promised payments he couldn't deliver, but Victor's cold smile never wavered. The Russian had already decided on his course of action. "I think a demonstration is needed," Victor continued, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "Something to help you understand the seriousness of your situation. Dmitry here was just telling me how much he enjoys testing himself against new opponents. He has become bored with our usual entertainment." Maya was serving coffee when Victor's gaze fell on her, and she felt a chill of recognition in his eyes. There was intelligence there, along with the kind of predatory awareness that came from years of reading people for weakness and opportunity. He studied her with the focus of someone who noticed details others missed. "This one," Victor said suddenly, pointing at Maya, "she will provide our demonstration. Dmitry needs practice, and your servant needs to learn proper respect for her betters." Richard tried to protest, not from any concern for Maya, but from fear of the legal complications that might follow. Victor's laughter cut through his objections like a blade through silk. "Legal complications?" Victor repeated mockingly. "My dear Richard, you seem to misunderstand our relationship. I own several judges, 3 police chiefs, and more lawyers than you could count. This woman is a servant in your house, a person of no importance with no connections. Who would miss her? Who would even notice?" The casual dismissal of her life should have been devastating, but Maya found herself analyzing the tactical situation instead. 7 armed men, at least 2 with serious military training, positioned throughout a house she knew intimately. Multiple escape routes, weapons available if necessary, but civilians who would inevitably become collateral damage in any confrontation. Catherine had pressed herself against the wall, her face twisted with terror and disgust. "She's just a servant," she whimpered. "Please, there must be some other way to resolve this." Victor's smile widened with genuine amusement. "Oh, But there is another way. If your servant can provide adequate entertainment for Dmitri, perhaps we can reduce your husband's debt accordingly. Think of it as a sporting bet. Dmitri stepped forward, and Maya got her first close look at the man whose file she had read in intelligence briefings. He was smaller than his reputation suggested, but moved with the fluid grace of someone who had turned violence into art. His eyes held the flat emptiness of a professional killer who had stopped counting victims years ago. 10 minutes, Victor announced cheerfully. If your servant can survive 10 minutes against Dmitri without weapons, I will reduce Richard's debt by half. If she cannot, well, the debt remains unchanged, and we dispose of the mess. The casual announcement of potential murder hung in the air while the Blackwoods processed what they were hearing. Richard's calculations were written clearly on his face. He was weighing Maya's life against his financial obligations and finding her expendable. She's just a cleaning woman, Richard said finally, his voice hollow with defeated resignation. She doesn't know how to fight. This isn't fair. Victor's laugh was genuinely delighted. Fair? My dear Richard, fairness is a luxury for people who have power. Your servant exists at our pleasure, just as you do. The only difference is that she might earn her survival, while yours depends entirely on my mood. Maya remained silent throughout the exchange, her mind automatically running combat calculations. Dmitri was dangerous, but he was also overconfident and accustomed to fighting victims rather than soldiers. His stance suggested someone trained in classical Spetsnaz techniques, effective but predictable to someone familiar with military fighting systems. The living room was cleared of furniture to create an improvised fighting space, while Victor's men positioned themselves to prevent any attempt at escape. Catherine had retreated to the far corner, her face buried in her hands as she refused to watch what she assumed would be a massacre. Richard stood frozen, caught between terror and fascination as he prepared to witness the destruction of someone he considered property. Before we begin, Victor announced with theatrical flourish, perhaps we should give the lady a chance to beg for mercy. It adds flavor to the entertainment. All eyes turned to Maya, expecting tears, pleas, or at least some display of the fear that any rational person would feel in such circumstances. Instead, they saw something that stopped several conversations mid-sentence. Maya had straightened to her full height, her shoulders squared, and her head high. The submissive servant was gone, replaced by someone whose presence filled the room with quiet confidence. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear, carrying undertones of authority that made several of Victor's men unconsciously step backward. I don't beg, she said simply. And I don't break. Victor's eyebrows rose with surprised interest. This was not the reaction he had expected from a domestic servant facing certain death. There was something in Maya's bearing that suggested depths he had not anticipated, layers beneath the surface that warranted closer examination. Dmitri simply smiled, interpreting her words as the desperate bravado of someone trying to maintain dignity in the face of inevitable defeat. He had heard similar speeches from countless victims over the years, and they all ended the same way. His hands moved in preparation for combat, fingers flexing with anticipation of violence. Very good, Victor said approvingly. Spirit makes the performance more interesting. Dmitri, please begin whenever you are ready. And remember, we need her to last long enough for proper entertainment. The Russian moved forward with predatory confidence, his approach calculated to intimidate rather than immediately conclude. He wanted to savor the process, to demonstrate his superiority before delivering the final blow. His first attack was a casual backhand designed to stagger and humiliate rather than seriously injure. Maya's response was so fast that several observers missed it entirely. She slipped the blow with minimal movement, her body flowing like water around Dmitri's arm, while her own hand shot forward in a precisely targeted strike. Her palm connected with a pressure point on his wrist that sent numbing shock waves up his entire arm. Dmitri's confident smile faltered as unexpected pain shot through his nervous system. He had expected to be fighting a terrified amateur, not someone who clearly understood human anatomy well enough to target specific vulnerabilities. His second attack came faster and harder, driven by professional pride and growing concern. Maya avoided this strike as easily as the first, her movements economical and precise. She was reading Dmitri's patterns, cataloging his preferences and weaknesses with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained to analyze and exploit enemy capabilities. Each of his attacks revealed more information while accomplishing nothing. The room had fallen completely silent except for the sound of movement and heavy breathing. Victor's casual confidence was beginning to show cracks as he realized that his entertainment was not proceeding according to plan. The servant woman was not simply surviving Dimitri's assault. She was controlling it. Richard's mouth hung open in shock as he watched Maya move with fluid grace around attacks that should have crippled or killed her. This was not the broken woman who had cleaned his floors for 3 years. This was someone else entirely, someone whose capabilities he had never imagined. Catherine had looked up from her hands and now stared in fascination and horror at the impossible scene playing out before her. The woman she had treated as less than human was dancing around one of the world's most dangerous men as if he were a clumsy child. Dimitri's attacks were growing more desperate as frustration replaced confidence. He was pouring real effort into strikes that should have connected, should have ended this humiliating display. Instead, he found himself hitting empty air while his opponent seemed to anticipate his every move. Maya checked the timer Victor had ostentatiously started on his gold watch. For minutes had passed, and she had barely expended any real effort. It was time to shift from pure defense to something more dramatic. Time to remind everyone in the room exactly what they were dealing with. Her first real counterattack came without warning. A precision strike that exploited the opening Dimitri created while overextending on a haymaker punch. Maya's elbow connected with his solar plexus with surgical accuracy, driving the air from his lungs and sending him staggering backward in shock. The transformation was complete. The worthless slave was gone, replaced by a warrior whose very presence seemed to change the atmosphere of the room. Victor's entertainment was about to become something far more serious than he had bargained for. Dimitri stumbled backward, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage as he struggled to regain his breath. The casual contempt he had shown moments earlier was replaced by the focused intensity of a professional fighter who had just realized he was in serious trouble. His hand moved instinctively toward the concealed weapon at his waist, but Victor's sharp gesture stopped him. "No weapons," Victor commanded, his voice carrying new interest and respect. "This has become far more entertaining than I expected." Maya stood calmly in the center of the improvised fighting space, her breathing steady and controlled while Dimitri gasped for air. She had used only a fraction of her capabilities, but the message was clear to anyone with eyes to see. The woman they had dismissed as worthless possessed skills that defied their assumptions about who she was and what she represented. Catherine's hands pressed against her mouth as she struggled to process what she was witnessing. The servant woman who had silently endured years of abuse and humiliation was methodically dismantling one of the most dangerous men she had ever encountered. Every assumption about power and weakness was being turned upside down before her eyes. Richard found his voice first, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "How is this possible? She's just a cleaning woman. She can't fight like that." Victor's laugh carried a note of genuine appreciation as he began to understand the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "My dear Richard, I think your cleaning woman has been keeping secrets from you. Dimitri, continue. I want to see what other surprises our hostess has prepared for us." The Russian assassin had recovered enough to launch his next assault, but his approach was now marked by caution and respect for an opponent who had already proven more dangerous than anticipated. His strikes came in calculated combinations, each one designed to probe for weaknesses while minimizing his exposure to counterattacks. Maya responded to the increased intensity with fluid adaptations that demonstrated years of advanced combat training. She moved like a dancer, but every step was positioned for maximum tactical advantage. Her blocks were simultaneously defensive maneuvers and offensive setups, creating opportunities for devastating counterstrikes that she chose not to exploit. Victor pulled out his phone and began recording, his business instincts recognizing that he was witnessing something extraordinary. This was not simply a servant defending herself. This was a master class in hand-to-hand combat being delivered by someone who clearly belonged in an entirely different category of dangerous. "Magnificent," Victor breathed, his eyes bright with the excitement of someone who appreciated lethal artistry. Absolutely magnificent. Richard, where did you find this woman? And, more importantly, do you have any idea what you actually hired? The questions hung unanswered as Maya and Dmitri continued their deadly ballet. The Russian was pouring genuine effort into his attacks now, using techniques that had killed dozens of opponents over his brutal career. But Maya met each assault with responses that seemed almost casual, as if she was operating well within her comfort zone. 6 minutes had elapsed on Victor's timer, and Dmitri was beginning to show signs of fatigue. His breathing was labored, his movements less precise, while Maya appeared as fresh as when the fight had begun. The endurance differential was becoming a factor that would soon determine the outcome. Maya decided it was time to escalate her demonstration. Instead of simply avoiding Dmitri's next combination, she stepped inside his guard and delivered a series of strikes that targeted specific nerve centers with surgical precision. Each hit was calibrated to cause maximum disruption without permanent damage, a level of control that spoke to extraordinary training and discipline. Dmitri's left arm went numb from shoulder to fingertips as Maya's strike disrupted the nerve cluster at his collarbone. His follow-up punch lost power as targeted pressure points sent shock waves through his muscular system. For the first time since the fight began, real fear appeared in his eyes as he realized he was facing someone whose capabilities far exceeded his own. The room had become completely silent except for the sounds of combat. Victor's men had stopped their casual conversations and were watching with the focused attention of professionals who recognized superior skill when they saw it. Several hands had moved unconsciously toward concealed weapons, though their owners were not entirely certain whether they were preparing to protect their boss or defend themselves. Catherine had sunk into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her as she watched 3 years of assumptions collapse in real time. The woman she had treated as property was systematically destroying a professional killer with techniques that belonged in military training facilities rather than domestic service. Richard's face had gone pale as he began to understand the implications of what he was witnessing. If Maya possessed these capabilities, what else about her was false? How many other lies had he accepted without question? And, most terrifyingly, what might she be planning as payback for years of abuse and humiliation? 8 minutes had passed, and Dmitri was in serious trouble. His attacks had become desperate and uncontrolled, while Maya continued to demonstrate perfect technique and tactical awareness. She was not simply winning the fight. She was giving a clinic on combat superiority that would have impressed instructors at the most elite military training facilities. Victor made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including his own men. He raised his hand and called out clearly, "Stop. Both of you, stop immediately." Maya stepped back instantly, her body still poised for combat, but no longer actively engaged. Her breathing remained controlled, her stance balanced and ready, but she had responded to the command with military precision that spoke to deeply ingrained discipline. Dmitri sagged against the wall, grateful for the reprieve, but confused by his boss's intervention. He had been losing badly, but there were still 2 minutes remaining on the timer. Victor's decision to end the fight early suggested that he had seen enough to draw his own conclusions. "Fascinating," Victor said as he approached Maya with newfound respect. "Absolutely fascinating. You are clearly not what you appear to be, and I suspect that everything we think we know about you is carefully constructed fiction." Maya remained silent, her eyes alert and tracking every movement in the room. She had revealed far more than she had intended, but the situation had demanded a choice between maintaining her cover and surviving the encounter. Now she would have to deal with the consequences of exposure. Victor studied her with the intense focus of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. Military training, certainly. Special forces, almost definitely. But which unit? And how did you end up serving coffee in this provincial American mansion? The questions were astute and dangerous. Victor was clearly intelligent enough to piece together at least part of the truth if given enough information. Maya's silence was as much a tactical decision as her earlier fighting choices. Some secrets were too dangerous to reveal even under extreme circumstances. Richard found his voice again, though it cracked with strain. "I don't understand any of this. She's been working here for 3 years. She cleans and cooks and never says a word. How could she possibly know how to fight like that?" Victor's smile was predatory as he began to see the larger picture. "Oh, Richard, I think you have been harboring a very interesting guest without realizing it. The question now is whether she represents an opportunity or a threat to our continued business relationship." Maya's tactical assessment of the situation was rapidly evolving. Victor was too intelligent and too dangerous to simply walk away from this encounter. His curiosity had been aroused, and men like him did not allow interesting mysteries to remain unsolved. She was going to have to make some very difficult decisions about how much truth to reveal. The immediate threat from Dmitri had passed, but Maya realized she now faced a far more complex challenge. Victor's interest could lead to investigations that would uncover truths she had spent 3 years hiding. Her carefully constructed civilian identity was crumbling, and with it the safety that anonymity had provided. Catherine was staring at Maya with a mixture of fear and fascination that made her earlier arrogance seem like ancient history. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of assumptions being shattered in real time. Maya met her gaze directly for the first time since arriving at the estate. When she spoke, her voice carried authority that had been hidden beneath years of enforced submissiveness. "I'm someone you never bothered to know." Victor clapped his hands slowly, genuinely appreciating the dramatic revelation. "Excellent. Simply excellent. I do so enjoy it when simple business transactions become complex puzzles. Now, my dear mystery woman, perhaps we can discuss this situation like civilized adults rather than continuing this charade of domestic service." The 10-minute timer had long since expired, but Victor's attention had moved far beyond his original entertainment. He had discovered something much more valuable than a simple demonstration of power over Richard's household. He had found a professional whose capabilities suggested possibilities he was only beginning to explore. Maya knew that her life had just taken another sharp turn toward danger and uncertainty. The careful balance she had maintained for 3 years was gone, replaced by exposure that could lead anywhere from recruitment to elimination. But for the first time since arriving at the Blackwood estate, she felt like herself again rather than the broken woman she had pretended to be. The worthless slave was officially dead. What remained to be seen was who Maya Johnson would choose to become next. Victor gestured toward the expensive leather furniture that had been pushed aside for the impromptu combat demonstration. "Please sit. I think it's time we had a proper conversation between professionals rather than continuing this theater of master and servant." Maya remained standing, her posture alert and ready despite Victor's seemingly friendly invitation. 3 years of hiding had taught her to recognize when apparent courtesy masked genuine danger, and this Russian oligarch represented threats she was only beginning to calculate. "I prefer to stand," Maya replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone comfortable with taking control of situations. "And I prefer honest conversations to whatever games you're planning." Victor's laugh was genuinely delighted as he settled into his favorite chair, clearly enjoying this unexpected development. "Games? My dear, I am far too impressed to waste time on games. What I witnessed just now was artistry, pure and simple. Dmitri has killed more men than most soldiers see in entire wars. And you handled him like a training exercise." Dmitri had recovered enough to stand upright, though his face still bore the flush of humiliation and the wary respect of someone who had been thoroughly outclassed. He had spent his adult life being the most dangerous person in any room, and discovering that assumption was false had shaken him more deeply than the physical beating. Richard cleared his throat nervously, clearly struggling to process the transformation of his household dynamic. "I still don't understand how this is possible. Maya has been here for 3 years. She's been completely docile, never caused any problems, never showed any signs of being able to do anything like this. That," Victor observed with appreciation, "is exactly what makes her so dangerous. Anyone can hire muscle that announces itself with scars and swagger. But someone who can hide capabilities like hers for 3 years? That represents a level of operational discipline that belongs in intelligence services, not domestic work." Maya's expression remained neutral, but Victor's assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Her ability to maintain deep cover for extended periods had indeed been one of her strongest assets during her military career. The skills that had made her effective in hostile territory were the same ones that had allowed her to survive in the Blackwood household. Catherine had found her voice again, though it came out as a strangled whisper. All this time, we thought you were nothing. We treated you like you were worthless, and you could have killed us all whenever you wanted. The statement hung in the air like an accusation and a revelation simultaneously. Maya turned her attention to Catherine, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed her true thoughts to show in her expression. The contempt was devastating in its quiet intensity. You thought I was nothing because thinking otherwise would have required you to acknowledge that your comfortable world is built on the suffering of people you consider beneath your notice, Maya said, her words carrying the weight of accumulated anger held in check for years. It was easier to pretend I wasn't human than to face what that said about who you are. Victor stood abruptly, his business instincts recognizing an opportunity that could prove extremely valuable. Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. You are wasted in domestic service, my dear. Someone with your capabilities should be working for people who understand your worth. Maya's tactical awareness immediately categorized Victor's offer as the trap it undoubtedly was. Men like him didn't offer employment. They acquired assets through whatever means proved most effective. His appreciation of her skills was genuine, but his intentions were almost certainly predatory. I'm not interested in changing employers, Maya replied firmly. Especially not to someone whose business model involves threatening innocent people with torture and death. Victor's smile widened at her direct challenge. Innocent people? My dear, there are no innocent people in positions of real power. Richard here has built his fortune on the misery of thousands of workers whose labor he exploits. The difference between us is that I am honest about the violence that maintains our social order. The philosophical discussion was interrupted by the arrival of additional vehicles outside the estate. Through the windows, Maya could see more black SUVs pulling up the circular drive, disgorging armed men who moved with military precision. Victor had apparently called for reinforcements while she was focused on the fight with Dmitri. Insurance, Victor explained casually as he noticed Maya's attention shift to the new arrivals. Your demonstration was impressive enough that I decided additional precautions were warranted. I hope you understand that this is simply good business practice. Maya's mind automatically began calculating odds and escape routes as the tactical situation deteriorated. 8 additional armed men, probably professionals given their movement patterns, positioned to cover all obvious exits from the house. The estate's isolation, which had once provided privacy for her hiding, now worked against any possibility of outside intervention. Richard was watching the new arrivals with growing panic as he began to understand that his problems with Victor were escalating beyond simple debt collection. This wasn't part of our agreement. You said you just wanted to send a message. And what a message it has been, Victor replied cheerfully. Though perhaps not the message either of us expected when the day began. Your servant has proven far more interesting than anticipated, which changes the nature of our transaction considerably. Catherine pressed herself against the wall as armed men took positions throughout the house, her face pale with terror as she realized that her family's situation had moved far beyond anything resembling normal business dealings. Please, we can pay you. Whatever Richard owes, we can find the money. Victor's dismissive wave made it clear that money was no longer the primary consideration. My dear woman, you are thinking far too small. What we have discovered here today is worth far more than your husband's pathetic debt. The question is how to properly exploit this unexpected windfall. Maya had remained silent during the exchange, but her mind was racing through possibilities and contingencies. Victor's interest in her capabilities was dangerous enough, but the arrival of additional personnel suggested that he was planning something more complex than simple recruitment or elimination. You're making a mistake, Maya said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that made several of Victor's men unconsciously check their weapons. You're assuming that what you witnessed was the extent of my capabilities. That assumption could prove very costly. Victor's eyes lit up with genuine excitement at the implied threat. Oh, I am certain that you have many more surprises in store. That is exactly what makes you so valuable. The question is whether you would prefer to demonstrate those capabilities as my employee or my enemy. Dmitri had recovered enough to rejoin the conversation, though his earlier confidence had been replaced by professional wariness. Boss, maybe we should consider the risks here. If she has this kind of training, she probably has connections we don't know about. Connections, Victor mused thoughtfully. Yes, that is an excellent point. Military training like this doesn't come from weekend classes at the local gymnasium. Someone invested serious time and money in developing those skills, which means someone may have expectations about how they should be used. Maya's silence was becoming its own form of communication, telling Victor more than any direct answers would have provided. Her refusal to offer explanations or justifications suggested confidence in resources that extended beyond her immediate physical capabilities. The standoff was interrupted by the sound of Maya's cell phone ringing. The device had been silent for months, used only for emergencies that had never materialized. Everyone in the room froze as the electronic sound cut through the tension like an alarm bell. Victor nodded toward the phone with curiosity and caution. Answer it. But please remember that any attempt at calling for help would be extremely unwise given our current situation. Maya retrieved the phone from her pocket, glancing at the caller ID with an expression that revealed nothing to the watching audience. When she answered, her voice was steady and professional. Johnson. The conversation that followed was brief and conducted entirely in code that meant nothing to the listeners, but conveyed crucial information to Maya. When she ended the call, her expression had shifted subtly in ways that suggested new calculations and possibilities. Friends of yours? Victor asked with deceptive casualness, his instincts telling him that the timing of the call was far too convenient to be coincidental. Maya slipped the phone back into her pocket, her movements deliberate and controlled. You could say that. People who have been keeping track of my situation and are prepared to take action if necessary. Victor's business instincts immediately recognized the implications of backup resources and external oversight. The isolated estate that had seemed perfect for conducting private business was suddenly feeling far more vulnerable than he had anticipated. Perhaps, Victor said carefully, we should discuss this situation more thoroughly before making any hasty decisions. It would be unfortunate if misunderstandings led to unnecessary complications for all parties involved. Maya's slight smile was the first genuine expression she had shown since the confrontation began. Misunderstandings can indeed be very dangerous, especially when people make assumptions about who they're dealing with and what resources might be available. The careful balance of power in the room was shifting again, but this time the change was working in Maya's favor. Victor's confidence was being replaced by the caution of a businessman who had suddenly realized that his risk assessment might have been catastrophically incomplete. Outside, the sound of additional vehicles could be heard approaching the estate, but these new arrivals had a different character than Victor's reinforcements. Maya's backup was apparently as real as her implied threats, and the isolated estate was about to become much more crowded than anyone had anticipated. The approaching vehicles announced themselves with the distinctive sound of high-performance engines and coordinated movement that spoke to military precision. Victor's men tensed as they recognized the signs of a professional response team, their casual confidence evaporating as they realized they might be facing opponents with capabilities matching their own. Through the estate's large windows, everyone could see 3 black tactical vehicles taking positions that effectively surrounded the property. The new arrivals moved with the fluid efficiency of a special operations team, establishing fields of fire and communication protocols that demonstrated extensive training and experience. Victor's face had lost its earlier amusement as he began to understand that his simple debt collection had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. It seems your friends take your welfare very seriously, he observed, his tone now carrying genuine respect mixed with concern. Maya's posture had subtly shifted from defensive readiness to confident authority as backup resources arrived. They've been monitoring my situation for some time. When certain protocols are triggered, they respond accordingly. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun emerged from the lead vehicle, her naval uniform crisp despite the tactical vest and sidearm that marked her as something other than a typical administrative officer. She approached the house with the confident stride of someone accustomed to taking control of difficult situations. That, Maya said quietly as she watched her former teammate approach, is Lieutenant Commander Chun, United States Navy Special Operations. I suspect she has some questions about the current situation that you may find difficult to answer. Victor's quick mind immediately grasped the implications of military involvement in what he had assumed was a private criminal matter. His business empire depended on operating beneath the notice of serious law enforcement attention, and the arrival of special operations personnel suggested that his assumptions about the stakes had been wildly incorrect. Richard pressed himself against the wall as armed figures took positions around his property. Finally, understanding that his comfortable world of privilege and casual cruelty had collided with forces far beyond his ability to control or comprehend. Maya, what have you done? Who are these people? Maya turned to face the man who had spent 3 years treating her as property, her expression carrying the accumulated weight of every humiliation and injustice she had endured. These are the people who never forgot that I was worth something, even when I had forgotten it myself. The front door opened without ceremony as Sarah Chun entered with 2 heavily armed companions who immediately began assessing the tactical situation inside the house. Her eyes found Maya instantly, and the relief that flashed across her features was genuine and profound. "Lieutenant Johnson," Sarah said formally, though her voice carried undertones of emotion that spoke to deep personal concern. "You missed your scheduled check-in. We came to investigate." Maya straightened to attention automatically, muscle memory overriding 3 years of enforced submissiveness. "Commander Chun, the situation has become complicated, but I am unharmed and operational." Victor watched this exchange with the fascination of someone seeing puzzle pieces fall into place. "Lieutenant Johnson, not Maya the cleaning woman, but Lieutenant Johnson of the United States Navy. How very interesting indeed." Sarah's attention turned to Victor with the focused intensity of someone conducting a threat assessment. "And you would be Victor Kozlov, currently under investigation by several international agencies for activities that violate multiple treaties and domestic laws." The casual revelation that his identity and activities were known to military intelligence clearly shook Victor's confidence. His business empire had been built on operating in shadows and maintaining plausible deniability, neither of which seemed available in the current circumstances. "Commander," Victor said carefully, "I believe there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of my business here today. This was a private matter between myself and Mr. Blackwood regarding certain financial obligations." Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. "Private matters that involve threatening and attempting to murder United States military personnel tend to become public very quickly, especially when that personnel member is currently under protective observation." Dmitri shifted nervously as he began to understand that his earlier fight with Maya had been observed and documented by people with the authority and capability to hold him accountable for his actions. Professional killers operated on the assumption of anonymity, and the presence of military witnesses eliminated that protection entirely. Catherine found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Maya, I don't understand any of this. You've been here for 3 years. You've been cleaning and cooking and never said a word about being in the military." Maya's expression softened slightly as she looked at Catherine, seeing fear rather than the casual cruelty that had characterized their relationship for years. "I was in hiding, recovering from an incident that forced me to disappear from military records. The Blackwood estate seemed like a safe place to maintain a low profile." "Incident," Richard repeated, his voice cracking with strain as he tried to process the revelation that his servant had been a fugitive from circumstances he couldn't begin to imagine. "What kind of incident?" Sarah answered before Maya could respond, her voice carrying official authority. "The kind of incident that involves classified operations and personnel who know too much about activities that certain people would prefer remain secret. Lieutenant Johnson was betrayed by individuals within our own government who found her inconvenient." Victor's business instincts immediately recognized the implications of government corruption and classified betrayal. These were the kinds of secrets that could be extremely valuable to the right buyers or extremely dangerous to possess without proper protection. "Fascinating," Victor murmured, his mind already calculating possibilities and risks. A decorated military officer betrayed by her own people and forced into hiding. The possibilities for mutual benefit in such circumstances could be considerable. Sarah's hand moved to her sidearm with casual threat as she addressed Victor directly. The only possibility you need to consider is how quickly you can remove yourself and your people from this property before I decide that your presence here constitutes a continuing threat to military personnel. The standoff had reached a crucial moment where violence seemed inevitable unless someone made a decision to de-escalate. Victor's men were professional enough to recognize that they were outgunned and outmaneuvered, but their leader's pride and business interests were clearly warring with tactical common sense. Maya stepped forward, positioning herself between the opposing forces with the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing dangerous situations. "Commander, Victor's debt collection business with the Blackwoods is not our concern. Our only interest should be concluding my extended protective observation and returning to active duty." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding that Maya was offering Victor a way to withdraw with minimal loss of face while simultaneously ending her own exile from military service. "Agreed. Lieutenant Johnson's protective period is officially concluded as of this moment." Victor recognized the diplomatic solution being offered and weighed his options carefully. Continuing the confrontation would inevitably lead to legal complications he couldn't afford, while withdrawing would preserve his business interests and avoid military attention he definitely didn't want. "Perhaps," Victor said finally, "this has all been an unfortunate misunderstanding between business associates who were unaware of each other's true circumstances. Mr. Blackwood, and I can certainly resolve our differences through more conventional means." Richard sagged with relief as he realized that the immediate threat to his life was being removed, though his financial obligations to Victor remained unchanged. His comfortable world had been shattered, but at least he would survive to deal with the consequences. Catherine stared at Maya with a mixture of awe and shame as she tried to reconcile 3 years of assumptions with the reality of who had actually been living in their house. "All this time, you could have left whenever you wanted. You stayed here and let us treat you terribly when you could have destroyed us all." Maya met her gaze directly, her expression carrying hard-won wisdom about survival and endurance. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait for the right moment to reclaim who you really are." Today was that moment. Victor's withdrawal was conducted with professional efficiency, his men melting away from the estate as quickly as they had arrived. But his parting words carried implications that suggested this encounter would not be quickly forgotten. "Lieutenant Johnson," Victor called out as he reached the door, "should you ever decide that military service is insufficient compensation for your remarkable skills, please remember that I appreciate talent regardless of its original allegiances." Sarah's response was immediate and clear. "Mr. Kozlov, should you ever threaten American military personnel again, please remember that we have very long memories and very effective methods of response." As the estate returned to quiet, Maya found herself facing the Blackwood family, who had spent 3 years never bothering to learn her real name or consider her humanity. The power dynamic had shifted completely, but the damage to all their lives had already been done. "What happens now?" Catherine asked quietly, her voice carrying the uncertainty of someone whose fundamental assumptions about the world had been destroyed in a single afternoon. Maya looked around the house that had been both her hiding place and her prison, then turned toward the door where Sarah waited to escort her back to the life she had been forced to abandon. "Now I remember what I'm worth. And I go back to work protecting people who deserve protection." The worthless slave was truly dead now, replaced by Lieutenant Maya Johnson, who had never actually disappeared. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to return. As she walked away from the Blackwood estate for the final time, she carried with her the hard-won knowledge that strength sometimes meant enduring injustice until justice became possible. Behind her, the Blackwood family faced the consequences of 3 years spent treating a decorated war hero as property, while ahead lay a return to service with people who had never forgotten her value. The demonstration was over, but its lessons would resonate for years to come.